Good morning, everyone. So, like I said, I approach avian influenza from a perspective of, from import, safeguarding the U.S. animal health, and for export, ensuring that we have science-based access to trade markets. So let's see. So I want to talk a little bit. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. I know it's early here. It's even earlier back home in the States. But it's my first time in South Africa, so I enjoy the opportunity and look forward to the scientific exchange that you all have here at the meeting. So avian influenza, highly pathogenic avian influenza for us, was an extraordinary event. It was the largest animal health disease outbreak that we've had in the U.S., and it took a tremendous effort by our industry, state, and federal partners to address the situation. And it's been since the middle of June 17th, since we've seen any new cases of avian influenza. We're very much in the recovery phase of that outbreak. However, realizing the global nature of avian influenza right now, especially with the role of the migratory birds and the spread of the H5N8, we have taken a tremendous effort to prepare for this fall on the potential that there may be additional introductions as the migratory birds come back from the north. So I do want to just talk a little bit about the scale and scope of the outbreak, and then talk about where we were and the lessons that we've learned and how we've updated our planning for this fall. Altogether, we had a high-path avian influenza in 15 states in our commercial poultry and our backyard flocks. There were some additional findings in wild birds and captive wild birds, but the focus here is where there are trade impacts on our commercial poultry and the backyard poultry. Altogether, we had 1,011 commercial premises and 21 backyard flocks that were infected with the avian influenza. And we depopulated approximately 50 million birds. Despite the scope of that, and we've spent well over $500 million in our indemnity and our cleaning and disinfection and our response costs, you still have to put it in perspective on what it is within the United States. With those numbers, it was about a little over 3% of our annual turkey production, and it was about 10% of our layer inventory. So as we look, this slide here talks about where we had avian influenza in just our commercial flocks. And the avian influenza started in December of 2014 up in Washington State. We had wild bird and backyard findings. Our first commercial finding was in January in California. We had there was no spread from these two findings. It was isolated premises, and we were able to quickly contain and the outbreak in those counties. In March, we saw our first case in the poultry-dense Midwest, and that was in the state of Minnesota. And then from there, through April through mid-June, we quickly saw the spread in our turkey and our commercial layer industry in this area. I think it's important to point out that our broiler industry was not impacted by the avian influenza. Our broiler industry on the East Coast, Southeast, South, is very strong in those areas. So from this tremendous impact and disease, we've taken the approach of our response has 5 basic steps. We quarantine. So we quarantine the infected flock. We set up control zones, and we're restricting the movement of poultry and poultry products out of the control area. We have our eradication, and that's depopulating the affected flocks and any epi-related flocks. We monitor the region. It's important that we have a strong surveillance so that we can detect any additional cases of avian influenza and also show our success in eradicating avian influenza. On the premises that were infected, it's important to disinfect. We have to kill the virus, eliminate it from the premises and the environment there. And then finally, we need to test and confirm that those farms are avian influenza free so they can begin the process of restocking and rebuilding our industry. So through a series of meetings over this summer, we hosted an international symposium on avian influenza in Baltimore, Maryland in June. We had a meeting in July with our state and industry counterparts to talk about fall planning and lessons learning. And then also the industry held a meeting to learn the lessons learned and share the latest information. We've taken steps to update our avian influenza response plans. And we have robust response plans. We had them before the outbreak and we implemented them, but we've learned some lessons, especially with the scale that we dealt with. So one of the first is we have a goal to depopulate within 24 hours. As the response in the US initially took off, we didn't have all of the equipment that we needed, the resources to achieve this goal. And we are also dealing with complex layer facilities. Some of these had 1 million to 4 million birds on one farm with multiple barns. And it was really difficult to quickly do the euthanasia. This picture here is an example of one of our turkey barns, and it's the use of foam. It's a very effective and quick tool. You just need to make sure you have the foamers, the people trained in place, and you've got to have good water supplies. We, in the layers, used primarily CO2 carts, so those were very labor intense as we removed the hens from the cages and put them in the carts. And it took us a while on some of these large complexes to achieve our depopulation. So through this, we've enhanced our supplies of equipment in our national veterinary stockpile. Our goal remains to humanely depopulate as quickly as possible, but we also continue to examine what other alternative depopulation methods are available that have been used in other countries and that are supported so that we can achieve this goal of depopulating the birds within 24 hours and eliminating the virus from those premises. Another area of challenge was disposal. I mentioned we did have our emergency plans in place, but there was a major challenge in dealing with the amount and volume of birds and associated material. On our turkey facilities, we relied extensively on composting in-house or composting on premises. It's a very effective process, one that we've used with low pathogenic avian influenza and other diseases. But as you start to get in a scale of this, you've got to have the appropriate carbon sources and the manpower to do the composting. As we got into some of the large layer facilities, of course we can't compost those in-house, but there may not be enough room on site for either composting. We also did burial, where you have to look at your environmental laws, the water tables, the appropriate places to bury. We used landfills, and we ran into issues of having the appropriate permits and the access to the landfills. We had to work those through during the outbreak, and we had a backlog of the birds needing to be disposed. And we used incineration to a limited extent. So one of the things that we've challenged our states and industry is to really take a hard look at their facilities and get all of those pre-approvals that you need, from burial to landfill access, what your carbon sources are, and do a better job of pre-identifying where those are. Another area, and this is really where we are in our response, I feel we're very much in the recovery phase of our highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak. Like I said, we haven't had a case since June 17th, so we're in the final phases of cleaning and disinfection on these premises, and in fact, many of the producers are beginning to restock premises with birds. But some of the things that you deal with as you're cleaning, the traditional wet cleaning and disinfection, it's a very labor-intensive process. Many of the facilities are highly electronic, highly computerized, having to deal with that. So our focus coming into the fall is on virus elimination from these farms, and we'll use a variety of cleaning and disinfection tools, but a big one will be dry cleaning and using heat to eliminate the virus from the farms and follow up with testing to ensure we've been successful. Biosecurity. This is an important part, and ourselves and our industry groups in the U.S. are emphasizing all of the components that need to happen with biosecurity. It's very important that we prevent the entry of the disease onto the farms, but also into the barns. And we have to think about it a little bit different, and not just the farms, but the barns, each barn on the farm, and how we eliminate. So one of the things that we have seen, we definitely know through our epidemiology and our molecular genetics that there was a clear linkage to the wild birds and the migratory birds as they came down the migratory pathways. And in places like California, we didn't see any spread. We did have a reassortment with one of our North American low-path avian influenzas. And so the H5N2 was primarily what we dealt with in the Midwest. And while we have clear linkage with the wild birds, we also have epidemiology that shows that we had lateral spread. And we've done case studies with the industry, and we've done molecular genetic studies, and we've shown what some of the risk factors are. And those include trucks moving from farm to farm to pick up dead birds. We've seen where families, one person works for one company and one person works for another company. And so, of course, when they come home, they're there together. So we've seen some links like that and emphasized some of the basic steps and the components. But it's not just enough to talk about biosecurity. Biosecurity takes work. It's costly. And so we are working, we're looking towards the fall as how we can have the producers, we're providing some biosecurity checklist, and that the producers can self-certify that they have taken the appropriate biosecurity steps to try and prevent avian influenza. During the future, there's a lot of talk on auditing and the effectiveness of an auditing program. And so I think we'll continue to see within our industry and our companies and within our approach a greater emphasis and a greater accountability on biosecurity. So we're moving quite along here. The next area I want to talk about is vaccination, and of course, with our host today, vaccination and the topic comes up. For us, vaccination is a very complex issue. At this point, we have not made the decision to use vaccination, but it is a tool in our toolkit for outbreak response. We recently, the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture, we've been evaluating the different vaccines that are currently available. We're working with our Agricultural Research Service. They're doing research, working with vaccine companies. And we have recently submitted a request for proposal to purchase vaccine and stockpile it within our National Veterinary Stockpile. We want to ensure we have enough vaccine doses available that if we make the decision to utilize it in our outbreak response, we're ready and we're not waiting for the production or the availability of it commercially. I think it's important to talk about, some of the tools that are available. With a lot of the vaccines now, we do have the DIVA strategies, the ability to differentiate vaccinated birds from the infected birds, the PCR tools, all of those. Any approach we take will be tightly controlled. It will be under the state and federal regulatory authorities. It will be a controlled product. We'll use it in a suppressive and protective strategy. I think some of the things that that will play a role into any of our decisions on vaccination is we have to understand, can the disease be rapidly contained? What's the proximity of the disease to high-value genetic birds? The U.S. is a major world supplier of genetics all throughout. what's the poultry density in the area. I showed you, we talked about Minnesota, Iowa, a very poultry dense area, a lot of turkeys, a lot of layers, and that's an example of very dense. What's happening in the neighboring areas? Is there a high-path avian influenza outbreak going, and we need to get ahead of it and protect it from spreading? We're going to have to continue to evaluate the role of waterfowl and other wild birds and backyard flocks, and also our live bird markets. And then another factor is our physical and our economic resources that are available. And I told you my perspective comes from the trade side, and trade is a major driver in our U.S. poultry industry, from the genetics to the poultry products. And we do have to evaluate and talk with our trading partners on the impact that we will experience if there's vaccination that occurs. And so, part of that, we're out discussing with our trading partners. We're talking about vaccine strategies and plans, and within the regionalization context. And so, the trade, one of the things that has been good through this, even though we've experienced some countries that instituted a total ban on the United States, we've been very successful in regionalization approaches. And one of those examples is it really started with our neighbor to the north, Canada. Canada and the United States have a foreign animal disease zoning arrangement and also notifiable avian influenza regionalization agreement. So when Canada had their outbreak in the British Columbia, we quickly recognized their zoning and regionalization decisions, and Canada has done the same for us. But we've also been successful with a number of other countries in the recognition of our regionalization, from Japan to the European Union to some of the Middle Eastern countries. And while it's definitely had an impact on trade and it's impacted the sale of our genetics and our products, we've been able to mitigate the impact and retain a significant share of our markets. And so as we move forward, and this requires the U.S. to also look at ourselves, we have to look at our policies, how vaccination would tie in, how we regionalize with other countries, and we are keeping those dialogues going. We used our international symposium to have discussion from all over the world, much like this panel will today talk with you. And we've also continued dialogue with the World Animal Health Organization, the OIE. We just recently sent them the recommendations from the Baltimore conference, and we'll continue dialogue through those and with our trading partners. But it's an important part. We're a very global world, and we need to have a science-based approach on how we can safely trade products. And I think at times we need to rethink our risk from a zero risk to what a real science-based risk is, and how we can safely handle this. I mean, with our genetics industry and its tight levels of biosecurity, we've continued to supply hatching eggs and day-old poults throughout day-old chicks throughout the world, even in light of the avian influenza outbreak. So a few other things to just kind of wrap this up is some of our other planning activities. And we already talked about the migratory waterfowl and the global impact of H5N8. But we have started in July an enhanced wild bird surveillance program. Within North America, Canada, and Mexico are also doing enhanced surveillance. And we're looking at testing additional birds. We have targeted areas from years of avian influenza surveillance where we know particular gathering points and mortality events, but we're looking at several thousand birds to be tested. And it'll let us know how the viruses are moving across. We've got 4 flyways in the United States, how they're moving across the flyways and what the virus is doing. We know the H5N8. I talked about our reassortment with an H5N2. We also had a reassortment with an H5N1. This isn't the H5N1 that was in Asia, but it was reassortment with one of our low paths. And that one really, we only had a limited finding with that. So this will give real time, all of this information will be available for everyone so that we all can learn. And then that gives us the ability with our tools to move forward. I talked some about our national veterinary stockpile, and we're in the process of ensuring we've got the availability and the location of the equipment distributed in all of our poultry areas across the U.S. We're also in the process of hiring additional staff so that we can have more resources pre-trained and ready to go. I know right now we're in the process of hiring over 350 veterinarians and animal health technicians to supplement our response force. And then I think finally one of the key things is improved communication. Through this process, we have to remember for the producers that are being impacted in our industry that's being impacted by avian influenza, this is a major deal. It impacts their businesses, but they all care about animals, and they have to see the pain and suffering as avian influenza comes through and kills their flocks. And with incidents, there's lots of new people coming through, lots of change, lots of communication errors, and how we can have some consistency with case managers for flocks so people can deal with the same person throughout the process and have consistent information. We're working on fact sheets that everyone will know. So I have avian influenza. These are the steps that are going to happen. This is what the indemnity process is. This is what the cleaning and disinfection process is. So you can't do enough communication and outreach and the dialogue to have venues like this where we can talk about avian influenza and learn from each other's experiences and work to enhance our thinking moving forward. So with that, thank you. And